I'm Grimgrindle and welcome to another build tutorial. This time we're going to be having a look at what is no doubt the most complicated vehicle I've ever built. It's not a replica vehicle, but it is the Grizzly VF4. The Grizzly VF4 is an evolution of the Grizzly. The Grizzly is either the second or the first walker to be built in Banjo-Kazooie Nuts and Bolts. There's a little bit of contention there because both I and the other person who first made a walker posted their creations on the Banjo-Kazooie forum about it the exact same time, on the exact same day, but I think the other guy, if I'm completely honest, did slightly beat me to the punch. I had published a video of my walker the day before though, just not on the Banjo-Kazooie forum. Not that I'm still salty about it 6 years later or anything. Totally not. Not even slightly. Not in the least. Moving on. However, the functionality and control of the walkers differed rather largely, with his walker being quite the technological marvel requiring 2 triggers to move, right trigger moving the right foot, left trigger moving the left foot, whereas mine was more of a weak helicopter taking advantage of balance. Not being one to be upstaged, realizing that my simpler walker's functionality allowed for more diversity, and perhaps most importantly at the time being obsessed with Macross 7, I started to redesign the Grizzly to not only function as a walker, but also to be able to transform into a walker from a functioning fighter jet. This was probably a natural next step for the Grizzly, because even the original Grizzly that I first showcased already had a jetpack on it which functioned in the same way as the hover on the Landmaster. This was, however, at the time, not ever really meant to be one of its main features. It was instead due to the fact that because the Grizzly has propellers on it, the game thought it was a helicopter, and getting it down from the helipad whenever I went to test it was an utter pain in the bottom. So before we get into talking about how the more complicated Grizzly VF transforms, let's first explore how it walks by having a look at the Grizzly Mark 10. As you can see, each leg of the Grizzly is made up of 2 distinct parts which fit inside each other. The concept is rather simple. The vehicle itself is sort of like a helicopter that is too heavy to lift itself. So much so that if you hold down your right trigger, the vehicle won't actually move anywhere. However, if you shift the weight of the vehicle by pressing your left thumbstick either left or right, this will rather quickly change. Because of where the cockpit of the walker is connected to the top leg sections, if you press your left thumbstick left, the weight of the cockpit will shift onto the left leg, alleviating the weight from the right leg. The right leg, now not burdened by the weight of the cockpit, using the fan will be able to lift up, and using the small jet will be able to move forward. With the 2 tow bars connecting the 2 leg portions functioning as a very rudimentary joint and allowing the foot a little bit more movement, allowing you a little bit more control. And then to take the second step, you simply do the same thing but leaning the vehicle on the other side. As I said, there are more complex and more impressive ways that walkers can walk, but this is the way that this walker walks. Although admittedly the Grizzly VF does in fact slide if you hold down the trigger. This is because I made it slightly lighter, because I wanted it to stride more, because it's funner to pilot. Yes, it's a bit of a cheat, so sue me. Or preferably don't, we can't afford it. Speaking of the Grizzly VF, let's move on to that now. You might think that adapting the Grizzly into a Grizzly Transformer should be as simple as just sticking wings onto the jetpack. Well, if only that were true. Unfortunately, if you build your vehicle standing upwards with the wings facing upwards, it doesn't seem to work quite so well as if you build your vehicle lying downwards. And secondly, one of the things I loved most about the Grizzly is piloting it in first person. Which unfortunately meant the only way I'd be happy with the Grizzly VF is if it too can be piloted in first person, in both its forms. So as you can see, if we delete the flight portions of the Grizzly VF, what's left underneath is a Grizzly that's very similar to the build of the Grizzly Mark 10. This is of course excluding the most notable differences, being that the cockpit is orientated so that if the Grizzly were standing up it would be pointing at the sky, and that on the top of the cockpit, which if the Grizzly were standing up would be on the back of the cockpit, is a large folding propeller. To better illustrate this and explain why, let's have a look at this wingless Grizzly VF in the game world to show what it looks like and why I've chosen to do this. As you can see, as I indicated, it looks a lot like the Grizzly Mark 10 minus the jetpack and with its cockpit pointing straight up to the ceiling, which means that if you go into the first person mode, what you're going to be looking at is the roof of Mumbo's motors. This is where we take advantage of the game a little bit and exploit one of the parts. You see, the game doesn't seem to think that propellers should be used for anything aside from helicoptering, and therefore a propeller facing sideways rather than upwards or downwards will automatically reorientate itself a little bit to be facing upwards. Equally helpfully, the game also doesn't appear to consider a closed propeller to be a propeller at all, and therefore to reorientate your cockpit from facing directly upwards to facing forwards, all you have to do is open the folding propeller and the game will automatically flip the cockpit from facing upwards to facing the forward position. This means that you can now easily transition from facing forwards in the flight mode with your Grizzly laying downwards to facing forwards in the mech mode when your Grizzly's standing up. In both modes, the first person view will function perfectly. Isn't that awesome? And then the Grizzly's flight capabilities is probably the most simple part of this entire vehicle. All it is basically a plane strapped to the back of your Grizzly. It's attached in two parts using two separate detachers, which is mainly to tie the two legs together to keep them from flapping around while you fly. It's also split in two, with the back half also being connected again with another detacher, which is mainly so when you eject it, it breaks up into more parts. This is because an earlier version of the Grizzly VF had trouble walking away from its flight pack when removed, so I just ended up breaking into more parts so it was easier to kick away. And there's also another detacher connected to the belly of the vehicle, which is the part of the cockpit which becomes the bottom of the cockpit when in walking mode, which is just there to hold a wheel on to make taking off a little bit easier. It's a little bit difficult to fly, fairly difficult to land, and sometimes does itself a little bit of damage. But once you get the hang of it, there's no funner vehicle to pilot. As always, at this point, I'm going to stop talking, and after I do, there'll be the layer by layer of this vehicle, so if you want to have it yourself in your own save, make sure to watch for that. And so, with all of that said and done, as always, thanks for watching, and until next time, I have been and still am Grim Grindle.
Hmm.